Well, greetings once again, fiction lovers. Trying something new with this this broadcast, and that is that I've got a microphone hooked up, and so maybe I can modulate my tone and not sound like I'm screaming into the microphone as I did before. So we stopped at the top of page 16 with our last walk through this initial reading, and so just wanted to remind you that what we ended with was that Lucrezia, she's otherwise known as Rezia, this is Septimus Warren Smith's wife from Italy, has noted here at the top of the page 16 that he's declared that he's going to kill himself, and so she remarks that this is cowardly, that a man doesn't do this, and this was generally believed to be the case throughout the world at this time, as people really didn't understand the nature of psychological illness and so forth. So this business will come front and center. There's going to be two doctors that we will be introduced to, both of whom have significantly different opinions relative to how to deal with someone who's got mental health issues, especially those who were formerly soldiers in service of the British Army. So as we push down to the bottom of this page, I wanted you to take a look at this long sentence. And this again is that Clarissa is noting the passage of this motor car and the window. So this must be a limousine of some sort, probably a Rolls Royce, and the blinds were drawn, or the curtain was drawn, so that no one's quite sure who's in there. And so this is coming through Clarissa. The face itself had been seen only once by 3 people for a few seconds. Even the sex was now in dispute. And here's the sentence. But there could be no doubt that greatness was seated within. Greatness was passing, hidden, down Bond Street, removed only by a hand's breadth from ordinary people who might now, for the first and last time, be within speaking distance of the majesty of England, of the enduring symbol of the state which will be known to curious antiquaries, sifting the ruins of time, when London is a grass-grown path, and all those hurrying along the pavement this Wednesday morning are but bones with a few wedding rings mixed up in the dust, and the gold stoppings of innumerable decayed teeth. The face in the motor car will then be known. It's a fairly stark image. That this is a long passage of time when you consider one of the great cities in England and in Europe that will ultimately be, as is noted here, a grass-grown path. Nice music there with the GR of the alliterative grass-grown, and then the assonance of the 2 A's. So once again, death is going to make an appearance, and we're going to see it throughout the narrative. I think worth noting over here on the second page is this speaks to Clarissa Dalloway and her character. The crush was terrific for the time of day. Lords, Ascot, Hurlingham, what was it? She wondered, for the street was blocked. The British middle classes sitting sideways on the tops of omnibuses with parcels and umbrellas, yes, even furs on a day like this, were, she thought, more ridiculous, more unlike anything there has ever been than one could conceive. The Queen herself held up, the Queen herself unable to pass. So you've got then the hyperbole, that is meant to express the extreme sort of silliness, actually, of Clarissa's observation. But then we've got the anaphora of the Queen held up, the Queen herself unable to pass. What we're going to find out as we push down this page is that someone from the car is going to hand a card to a policeman, and they're going to move the omnibus so that the car containing the who we find out later is the Prince of Wales to pass along, and sort of this sense that that within the city of London on this day we have seen a tremendous array of of humanity pass through, and we're going to meet some more as we progress through this, the first part of this reading. The car had gone, but it left a slight ripple which flowed through glove shops and hat shops and tailors' shops on both sides of Bond Street. So we've got that nice polysyndeton there. Again, this is items in a series that are separated by conjunctions and not by commas with a terminating conjunction. And so glove shops and hat shops and tailor shops. So this is an example of a device that I'm going to mention. It's called tricolon. The general figure, and this is a rhetorical figure of rhythm and balance, but isocolon is a series of similarly structured elements having the same length. It's kind of parallelism. So you've probably heard from the time you were in elementary school, Veni, Vidi, Vici, and I know I'm probably butchering the Latin, but I came, I saw, I conquered. So not only then do you have so that's an example of tricolon, it's also an example of asyndeton, and it's also an example of climax, to have gone from seeing a place and then to conquering it. Okay, so the idea of the repetition here, as we're seeing with the shops and shops and shops on Bond Street. I told you earlier that Bond Street was a major shopping district there in London. Let's see. This is a piece worth pointing out as the sort of the sense of majesty is under consideration by Clarissa. As we get down to the people that she perceives having seen the motor car with the dignitaries, with the royalty having come by, Clarissa notes this. At once they stood even straighter and removed their hands and seemed ready to attend their sovereign, if need be, to the cannon's mouth, as their ancestors had done before them. So, among the things that would show up here, this is, hyperbole to a certain extent. The cannon's mouth then is, we're talking about the having animated the cannon, and even if you want to look at that as synecdoche, you could. All right, so let's push over to the next page here, and again, synecdoche makes an appearance with toward the end of this long sentence. Shawled Moll Pratt, with her flowers on the pavement, wished her dear boy well. It was the Prince of Wales for certain, and would have tossed the price of a pot of beer, a bunch of roses, into St. James Street out of sheer lightheartedness and contempt of poverty, had she not seen the constable's eye upon her. So this is a good example of synecdoche, discouraging an old Irish woman's loyalty. The sentries at St. James saluted. Queen Alexandra's policemen approved. So this is another example of what's called isocolon. Oops. It's spelled isocolon, although you would never know it by the way that I'm writing it here. Okay, so it's that parallel structure. Then we have a really marvelous sort of long series here. And it's, again, the description of the crowd that has gathered in the wake of the motor car that's come through. A small crowd, meanwhile, had gathered at the gates of Buckingham Palace. Listlessly yet confidently, poor people, all of them, they waited. Looked at the palace itself with the flag flying at Victoria. Billowing on her mound, admired her shelves of running water, her geraniums, singled out from the motor cars in the mall, first this one, then that, bestowed emotion vainly upon commoners out for a drive, recalled their tribute to keep it unspent while this car passed and that. So you can hear the echo of the repetition of the this and that. And all the time let rumor accumulate in their veins and thrill the nerves in their thighs at the thought of royalty looking at them, the queen bowing, the prince saluting, at the thought of the heavenly life divinely bestowed upon kings, of the equerries and deep curtsies of the Queen's old doll-house, of Princess Mary married to an Englishman, and the prince, the prince, who took wonderfully, they said, after old King Edward, but was ever so much slimmer. So as you can see, I've got this marked up, pretty well, and I didn't get all of it just because it would be dense with writing. But you've got not only anaphora, at the thought of, but you've got the isocolon in that those elements in a series. And if I were you, I'd just go ahead and mark this. And then you've got the tricolon, of the heavenly life, of the equerries, of the Queen's old dollhouse. Okay, so much of these rhetorical figures of repetition, again, are to unify. And I point these things out not only so that you'll have something to pay attention to and to look for while you're reading, but also these are things that you can add, consider including in your own writing. So as you begin to think about your college essays coming up, these are the sorts of things that get the attention of readers there in college admissions offices. Okay, so you have a couple things happening here at the bottom of this page. Thought of the housemaids, the innumerable housemaids, the bedrooms, the innumerable bedrooms. And this is thinking about the palace. So you've got the amplification, you've got the parallelism, and then you've got that elaborative diacope. So the housemaids, the innumerable housemaids. So that's the example of the elaborative diacope there. And again, diacope is the repetition of generally a word or a couple of words that is separated by some intervening words. So it's from the Greek for cutting through. Let's see. Just want to point out the marvelous music in this passage here on page 20. And I'm pretty sure this is so we've been introduced to another character. And again, this is in passing. A little Mr. Bowley, who had rooms at the Albany and was sealed with wax of the deeper sources of life. Okay, so he has tears in his eyes, thinking about about himself as an Englishman. A breeze flaunting ever so warmly down the mall, through the thin trees, past the bronze heroes, lifted some flag flying in the British breast of Mr. Bowley, and he raised his hat as the car turned into the mall and held it high as the car approached, and let the poor mothers of Pimlico press close to him, and stood very upright. The car came on. This is just a marvelous example of Virginia Woolf's style. So after you have this long sentence, then she sort of punctuates it with this short one that gets right to the point of what's happening in this particular scene. So now this is our new example of modernity making an appearance. I referenced this in the last video about the airplane showing up. Suddenly Mrs. Coates looked up into the sky. The sound of an airplane bored ominously into the ears of the crowd. So I'm probably going to ask you a question about that, particularly relative to why ominously, and then bored into the ears. So this is clearly an example of synecdoche here. And so Woolf uses this adverb ominously because the sound of airplanes, especially to those who had fought in World War I, would have reminded them of battle, just as the backfiring car earlier sounded like a pistol shot. And in fact, the florist thought it was a pistol shot. So here then, everyone is looking at it, and it's going to go on for several pages of people trying to make out what it is that the skywriting airplane is actually writing, and it's an advertisement, as it turns out, for a type of toffee. And so here, Cremo, murmured Mrs. Bletchley, like a sleepwalker. She's mesmerized, of course, by the appearance of the airplane. With his hat held out perfectly still in his hand, Mr. Bowley gazed straight up. All down the mall, people were standing and looking up into the sky. As they looked, the whole world became perfectly silent. Of course, that's a hyperbole. And a flight of gulls crossed the sky, first one gull leading, then another. And in this extraordinary silence and peace, in this pallor, in this purity. So you've got that. Can you hear that tricolon? And it's also in combination with anaphora. Bells struck 11 times, the sound fading up there among the gulls. So this image of everyone looking at the airplane, of course, echoes the scene when the limousine passed with the prince within it. So again, here's things to take a look at. The airplane turned and raced and swooped. So we know that's an example of polysyndeton. And here with Lucrezia, and I'm going to point this out. So Lucrezia Warren Smith says, "Look, Septimus," she cried. So that's an example of epizeuxis. For Dr. Holmes had told her to make her husband, who had nothing whatever seriously the matter with him but was a little out of sorts, take an interest in things outside himself. So Dr. Holmes is emblematic of the old way of thinking of mental problems, that, stiff upper lip and all that. All you have to do is just a change of mindset and you're fine. And yet we'll find later that it is not quite so simple. So Dr. Holmes then is old medicine, old way of looking at things. And as I'm going to talk to you about tomorrow during our class meeting, Woolf was familiar with the work of Sigmund Freud, who was bringing psychology really to the fore in terms of contemporary science, and it was making its way, of course, into contemporary culture. It's not that Woolf was a Freudian, but she was aware of his work, and will refer to it in some places. So here, as Rezia is trying to get her husband to look at something outside himself, and this is going to go on for another couple of pages. So, thought Septimus, looking up, they are signaling to me. Not indeed in actual words, that is, he could not read the language yet, but it was plain enough, this beauty, this exquisite beauty. And tears filled his eyes as he looked at the smoke words languishing. So this is elaborative diacoby, this beauty, this exquisite beauty. Okay? And so this is also giving you an indication of, so if you want to call this characterization of Septimus, you can, but it's an indication that he is not right mentally. So then, as we see the appearance of the various letters that the airplane is writing above, lots of nice examples of figures of repetition. So we've got the polyptoton of wait and waited. We've got the epimony of rising and falling, rising and falling. So epimony, again, is the repetition of phrases back to back with no intervening matter, and the change, there's no change in the meaning of the phrase, in the same way that we have with epizeuxis. Here's the as Septimus tries to deal with the onslaught of the things that are running through his head, but he would not go mad. He would shut his eyes. He would see no more. So that anaphora there is to emphasize the sort of thoughts that are ripping through his head at this point. It's worth noting here at the top that there's a significant difference in the sort of interior lives of Septimus and his wife. They do not understand each other. She is devoted to him. She can't imagine what life would be like without him, and yet she is embarrassed by him and has no idea how to best deal with the fact that he has been significantly altered by the war, that he is not the man that she married 4 or 5 years ago back in Italy. And so you're going to get this from her at the end of this page, and I think it's worth noting. Far was the and the white houses which is supposed to accentuate the sense of discord and displacement that she feels here in England. And so both she and Maisie Johnson, who we're going to meet in a moment, look around at the people here in London and see them as being alien, as being foreign, unlike the people that they're used to. And at the same time, Londoners are going to see Maisie Johnson, who is Irish and speaks in a we're supposed to understand she speaks in an Irish accent. We're supposed to understand that Lucrezia is speaking in an Italian accent, and so they, of course, would seem utterly alien to Londoners. So here at the bottom, there was nobody. Her words faded like the sky written words, okay, like one's thoughts and feelings when they're arrested by something. And so Woolf uses this long reference to the way that the flame from the backside of a rocket will fade into the night. Here we get this good characterization of Rhetorical, which says, I am alone, I am alone. So that's epimony, and this is for vehemence because of the way that she feels, and yet she is unable really to express this to anyone. If she were going to be communicating with any of her people back in Italy, it would have to be by letter, and it's just not nearly as satisfying as the sort of outlets we have now with respect to to texting or calling or emailing and things of that nature. So you can see that sort of her mind state is in tumult, as is her husband's, just for different reasons. So where she says, and this is a long sentence, I am alone, she cried, by the fountain in Regent's Park, staring at the Indian and his cross, as perhaps at midnight, when all boundaries are lost, the country reverts to its ancient shape, as the Romans saw it. Okay, the Romans saw where London is lying cloudy when they landed, and the hills had no names, and rivers wound they knew not where. Such was her darkness, when suddenly, as if a shelf were shot forth, you hear that nice music there, and she stood on it. She said how she was his wife, married years ago in Milan, his wife, and would never, never tell that he was mad. So that epizeuxis, again for vehemence. Turning, the shelf fell. Down, down she dropped. For he was gone, she thought, gone as he threatened to kill himself, to throw himself under a cart. So I think if you really pay attention to, as this nice isocolon here, he waited, he listened. If you pay attention to all these devices in combination, I realize that some of this is going to be difficult to follow along with. However, I think if you focus on paying attention to, get in a quiet place when you're reading, and get in a mindset where you're going to try to keep track of who's being, where the lens of the writer is in a particular moment, and you'll see that there's a certain logic to it. Okay, so this here opens the loop on a new character. This is Evans. So I'll tell you that Evans was a compatriot of Septimus Warren Smith's in the war, and he keeps seeing him. You'll find out in a little bit that Evans was killed, and Septimus was there when he was sort of blown up in front of him, and it haunts him still. So we have this nice polyptyton, interrupted again. She was always interrupting. Here at the end of this page, I'm just going to gloss through this. Look, she implored him, pointing at the little troop of boys. Look, she implored him, for Dr. Holmes had told her to make him notice real things. Okay, so notice she said that again. And so she keeps trying to do what the doctor says, even though she has no idea why or how this is possibly going to work. So here's Maisie Johnson. She's a 19-year-old girl who is looking for directions to the tube station. This is the underground or subway system in London. And so you got this marvelous, we drop from the mind of Rhetorical immediately into the mind of Maisie Johnson. Both seemed queer. Maisie Johnson thought everything seemed very queer, that is, everything in London. In London for the first time, come to take up a post at her uncle's in, a post meaning a job, in Leadenhall Street and now walking through Regent's Park in the morning. This couple on the chairs gave her quite a turn. Meaning they sort of upset her. And so she says that she's going to remember this. This couple on the chairs gave her quite a turn. The young woman seeming foreign, the man looking queer, so that should she be very old, she would still remember and make it jangle again among her memories how she had walked through Regent's Park on a fine summer's morning 50 years ago. So jangle, of course, a nice example of onomatopoeia. She explains that just how jarring was her encounter with these people. Okay, let's see, and just pitch up here to the top of page 27. And now we're back in the mind of Rezia. Horror. She wanted to cry. She had left her people. She had warned her. They had warned her what would happen. Why hadn't she stayed at home? She cried, twisting the knob of the iron railing. And so these are the examples of the kind of rhetorical questions one asks when in emotional distress. And it's worth pointing out that the English are very reserved, again generally, and stereotypically, and then again stereotypically, those from sort of southern European countries, Spain and Italy and Greece and so forth, are generally seen to be emotional. If you've ever been to Italy, it's a marvelous awakening sort of for Americans, because people stand very close to each other. You'll see men who are middle-aged men, older men, young men, who will stand right up in each other's faces. They will, one will have his arm resting on the other's, and their noses will be 6 inches apart, and they're just having a conversation. And so there's that contrast that you have here with Rezia being female and Southern European, and not understanding how all around her people are sort of trying to suppress their emotions, and she wants very desperately to be able to share with someone her own emotional response to her husband's madness, and she is unable to do that. Okay, so here we have the airplane is now back in focus. Up again. Let's see here. Go ahead and go from here. Up at the airplane. So this is in the mind of Mrs. Dempster, and this is going to happen throughout the narrative. Hadn't Mrs. Dempster always longed to see foreign parts? And she's Mrs. Dempster has commented on Maisie Johnson and says, "Oh, here she is, and so young. She'll get married, and then she'll learn all about what it's like to be a woman who's married." And she doesn't have very positive things to imply there, but she had a nephew, a missionary. It's sword and shot. She always went on the sea at Margate, not out of sight of land, but she had no patience with women who were afraid of water. So she's portraying herself as being an adventurous sort, or adventuresome sort. It swept and fell. Her stomach was in her mouth. Up again. This is an example, I think we've talked about this before, what's called ellipsis. Okay, so ellipsis then is a sentence that is missing one of the key parts in the main clause, so either subject or verb, and so here is of course missing the subject. So away and away, the airplane shot. So generally a repetition of things like this is called plochie, but here it's diacope, away and away, and you'll notice that it appears again. The airplane shot, away and away the airplane shot, till it was nothing but a bright spark, an aspiration, a concentration, a symbol. So here you've got all these elements in combination. An example of isocolon. Okay, let's see. So what else do we need to take a look at? Well, we really don't need to take a look at much else. So in any case, we are now at the end of our reading, and I'll pick this up tomorrow.